A new deadly virus surfaced in 1981. Since then, 25 million people have died, and no single region on the Earth has been spared. In the U.S., over 1 million people are infected, and more than 25% don't even know it. The disease continues to ravage Africa and is expected to do the same in India, Russia, and China. Last year alone, 3 million people vanished from the face of the planet. And this year, HIV/AIDS will kill even more. All around the world, over 40 million people are infected. 5 million people are infected every year. 14,000 people will become infected today. There is no cure for this deadly virus. It destroys our communities. It destroys our families. Leaving 15 million orphans to fend for themselves. Million children who are without hope. This is the greatest humanitarian crisis in the world. Today, 8,000 people will die. Are you okay with this?
Until about 7 years ago, I'm really embarrassed to say I was okay with that. And in just an instant, my world turned upside down. I was sitting in my living room in my comfortable Orange County home and reading a news magazine, like I did on a weekly basis, and there was this one magazine that had an article on AIDS in Africa, and I was compelled to read it. I didn't care. I didn't read it because I was interested. I didn't read it because I was an advocate. I didn't read it because it mattered to me. For some reason, it captured my attention on that particular day. And as I opened the magazine and began to read about AIDS in Africa, there were these pictures that came along with the article, kind of like a lot of those that you just saw in that, and they were horrific, and they broke my heart, and they just made me sick, and I couldn't look at them, and so I tried to cover my face with my hands like this. This is the same way I watch a horror movie. It's like this, I block out the monster, and I was blocking out the monster and trying to still read the words on this page about AIDS in Africa, and I was doing pretty good at blocking out the pictures, but then there was this little box in the middle of the article, and in that box it said, at that time, 12 million children orphaned in Africa due to AIDS. I threw the magazine down on the ground because as I sat in my comfortable living room in Orange County, I realized I didn't know the name of a single orphan. I didn't know the name of a single person who was HIV positive. And I thought to myself, how could there be 12 million children orphaned anywhere due to anything and it not touch my life in the slightest? And how can there be an illness where at that time they said there were 40 million people who were infected with HIV? How could there be 40 million people in this world with an incurable disease and I don't know a single one of them? What is wrong with me that this does not touch my life? And so that night when I went to bed, all I could think about were the cries of the children whose pictures I had seen in that magazine article, who were dying. All I could think about the next morning when I woke up was I could still hear those cries. I would pick up the newspaper, and it's like for the next 30 days I was haunted. I could not get away from HIV and AIDS. It was on every newscast. There'd be, scrolling along the bottom of the screen, something about AIDS. Every newspaper I pick up, every magazine article, it was just like it was everywhere. And I began to get the idea that maybe God was trying to get my attention. And I'm like, back, please go away. In case you hadn't noticed, I'm a white suburban mom with a minivan. What do I know about a disease in Africa? What could I possibly do about that many orphans? God, you've got the wrong person. You better just leave me alone. And after about a month, really, of serious, intense wrestling of this sense that I was supposed to do something about it, and yet feeling completely unqualified, incapable, out of my league. I was a home ec major in college. What does a home ec major in Orange County, what could I possibly do about a crisis this big? And then I realized that I had come to that proverbial fork in the road, those moments that as you look at your life and you look at the decisions ahead of you, you realize I can either go this way or I can go this way. And whichever way I turn is going to affect my life dramatically. And I was at that fork in the road. I could either stuff cotton back in my ears, pretend like I had not read this article, pretend like I had not suddenly seen something that I'd never seen or let into my heart before. I could go about my comfortable life, or I could become engaged with the HIV/AIDS pandemic. And for me, as a Christian, it came down to this. I realized that I was accountable for my life, and that God would hold me accountable for the information that I had just received. And I couldn't really imagine it going very well with me, someday coming face to face with God and him going, remember that day I showed you that magazine article? What did you do about it? And me go, oh, you meant me? You meant me? You wanted me to do something? Oh, no, you couldn't have been serious. There are lots of other people more qualified, more time. I had a really busy life. You really didn't mean me, did you? And to realize that, yes, indeed, that in that moment I was being called to care for people with HIV. And so I made a very radical decision. I just kind of said, yes, okay, I'll do this. I don't know what this means, and I don't know what it's going to entail, and I don't know what the cost is going to be to me personally, and I don't have the faintest idea where to begin, and where do you start tackling the greatest humanitarian crisis that the world has ever seen? How do you begin to tackle the crisis, as I've since learned, not just 15 million children orphaned. There are 138 million, according to UNICEF, children who are orphaned in our world due to all those causes. How do you begin to touch those problems? And the minute I said yes, the minute I decided to embrace the pain of people that I didn't know and might never even meet, my heart broke into a million pieces. I felt like that my heart had been taken in front of, if you've ever seen in a meat grinder in a meat market, where they take a piece of steak and they put it through a grinder and they grind it, and what comes out on the other side is ground meat. It's ground hamburger. I felt like my heart went in as a steak and came out as a hamburger. My heart was in more pieces than I knew what to do with. And so I just began to learn to read because I knew nothing. But I had become a very seriously disturbed person. And one of the questions that people always ask me when they hear my story is they say, why HIV? Of all the things that you could be involved in, all the things that you could be an advocate for. And as Chanel and Amy said, I have had cancer twice. I've had breast cancer and melanoma. And it would be very logical and very reasonable for me to become an advocate for people with cancer. Or why not save the whales? List all kinds of things. Why are you an advocate for people with HIV? And because that is such a profound question that I've had to answer in my own life, I really want to share it with you because there are 5 reasons I think that every person needs to be concerned about people who are HIV positive. If you're taking notes, that's great. If not, don't worry about it. You can write it on your hand. But there are at least 5 reasons, and particularly reasons that I think the faith community, you may be part of a faith community already, a church or another religion. You're part of some faith community. And I believe every faith community, this is something that they have to grapple with. So I want to tell you why I think that it's so critical that we do. The first is because it's completely unpredictable. Nobody expects the faith community to be an advocate for what is largely a sexually transmitted disease. In my faith tradition, sex is not talked about very comfortably, let alone a sexually transmitted disease. I don't know if any of you can relate to that scenario if you grew up in a faith community at all. And so when the faith community actually leads the way and says, no, these are people that we have to care about. These are people that matter. These are people that are valuable and that deserve care and compassion, then it really is curious to people that we would do that we would be that way. But the reason that I am why it's so unpredictable, it's because of the stigma. HIV and AIDS has a stigma unlike any other illness, any other cause that I have seen in our world. There is nothing like the stigma that goes along with being HIV positive. And when I was diagnosed with breast cancer, I didn't have to worry that when I came home, from the doctor, that my husband was going to say, oh, you've got cancer. Well, guess what? I'm divorcing you, or I'm beating you. I didn't have to worry as a person dealing with cancer that my neighbors would decide that their kids couldn't play with my kids. I didn't have to worry that I might lose my job if somebody found out I had cancer. I didn't have to worry that when I went to church on Sunday that the people sitting next to me might just move over or just make it really clear that they didn't want anything to do with me because they were afraid of me. But that's exactly what happens to people who have HIV, the stigma that surrounds their life. Routinely, women are beaten and divorced. Routinely, children are not allowed to go to school, not allowed to play with other neighbor children. Routinely, people lose their jobs, they lose their place in their faith community. The stigma around HIV is profound and it's horrible and it affects people's lives. When I went to Africa the first time, because after I became an advocate, and in that moment where I just kind of said, yes, I surrender to becoming an advocate, I don't even know what it means, I realized that I wanted to see it for myself. And so within about 6 to 9 months after this epiphany, this day in my living room, I got on a plane and I went to Mozambique on the southern coast of Africa. And I wanted to meet people who were HIV positive. And I thought I was just going to be going like house to house, meeting people who were positive with this group that had brought me. And the first day, we got in a car and we began to drive out to the bush. And I still don't know what's ahead of me, and I'm just driving, and all of a sudden we stop our car, and all I can see is this huge tree. And we get out of the car, and I'm walking toward this huge tree, and under this tree, what I can see is just this cloth, piece of bright cloth. And as I get closer to the tree, I realize that piece of bright cloth is a woman, skeletal, like those pictures I had seen. I found out that her name was Joanna, and she and her husband, when their little village found out that she and her husband were HIV positive, their village kicked them out because everybody was afraid of them. They were so afraid that they too would become HIV positive if these two people continued to live in their little village. Well, Joanna had an aunt who lived a little ways away, and she was willing to help care for Joanna and her husband, and so they moved to this other little village. And as soon as that village found out that Joanna and her husband were positive, their tiny little stick hut that was no bigger than this table was mysteriously burned. So that when I met Joanna, she was homeless, dying under that tree. She was about a week away from death. She had unrelenting diarrhea. All that she owned in the world was the pieces of cloth that covered her. No cooking pans, nothing, no possessions. She was dying under a tree. Now, it's customary, even in places where people are very ill, to offer hospitality. We as Americans are not very hospitable people compared to many of the other people around the world. And here is a dying woman who has nothing who's going to offer me hospitality. She knows I'm a visitor from America. She tries to get up from where she is under this tree and to crawl to meet me because she can't walk. And so she begins to crawl on her elbows and her knees out to where we're standing just a few feet away. And she couldn't walk. She couldn't even crawl. She fell. And her aunt went over and picked her up under her arms and scooped her up and came and sat her down on a little piece of plastic just a few feet in front of this tree. And there this dying, homeless woman gathered up all her dignity and sat there with incredible poise and told me that I was welcome. I have to tell you that I have been... my dad was a pastor, so I was raised in church. I went to Bible college. I married a pastor. I've been a pastor's wife for 30 years. I mean, I'm pretty immersed in my Christian life and faith. I have to tell you that nothing in all those years prepared me for how to talk to a dying, homeless woman under a tree. And my first thought was, God, excuse me, what am I supposed to say? What do you say to somebody who's dying under a tree? What do I say? What does the good news of the gospel mean to somebody who's dying under a tree? The people I was with showed me. They showed me how to get down on that piece of plastic next to her, how to put my arms around her, how to look her in the face and say to her and weep with her and to encourage her and let her know that she was not forgotten. See, I believe that I was supposed to be there that day. And I believe as I talked to her, I could say, Joanna, your life on this earth has obviously held a lot of sorrow and a lot of pain and a lot of heartache. And I hurt for you. And I want you to know that God has not forgotten you. It may seem like you are forgotten and abandoned, but God has not forgotten you. And he has sent us today to remind you that you matter. And my arms around you are reminders that you are not alone in this world. Now, you and I could think of a story like that and go, wow, that's really dramatic. But that doesn't happen here in the United States. That doesn't happen. That might happen in places where people don't know very much about it, where the stigma is huge because they don't really understand. And so, okay, I can see that that would happen, but that would never happen here. Well, I want to tell you that I live in Orange County, and just a little ways up the freeway from me is Santa Ana. And in Santa Ana is a man named Alberto. And Alberto is disabled. He's in a wheelchair, and he has AIDS. And his brother has decided that Alberto can live in his backyard. And so Alberto, in his wheelchair, lives in his brother's backyard with Alberto's wife lives with him. And when she needs to try and help bathe her husband, she attaches one of those, gun, not a gun, but it's a nozzle to the end of the hose. And she shoots him with a big, heavy stream of water to try to knock the dirt and the grime off of his body. And his brother will bring him food. And he has a slop jar. And I want to tell you that in that family, the dog is treated better than Alberto because the dog can at least come in the house. The stigma that surrounds HIV is incredible, and it is dehumanizing, and it makes people feel like they are worse than dirt or trash. And that's the number one reason I am an advocate and why I'm begging you to become an advocate for people with HIV, because we have an opportunity in this life to make a difference in the stigma, in removing the stigma about HIV. The second reason that I'm an advocate is because it's an incurable disease. There are a lot of illnesses that are actually curable if you can get the right medication. As a person with cancer, see, if I had not had surgery and chemotherapy and radiation, I would eventually die from either breast cancer or melanoma. If I didn't have access to good medical care, one of those two cancers would have killed me. But because I had access to medication, I am considered in remission. I'm considered cured. That doesn't happen with HIV. There is no cure for HIV. And there may not be a cure for a long time. It's a virus that mutates so quickly that it's very difficult to come up with a vaccine that can cover all the different strains and mutations of HIV. If you wonder why there isn't a vaccine 28 years into this pandemic, it's because of its mutations. It's a very smart virus, and it's been very elusive to come up with a vaccine. So at this point in time, it is an incurable disease, and I want to be a part of caring for people who don't really have as much hope as some others do. It is HIV, you may or may not know this. It's amazing to me what people don't know about HIV. It's a virus that eventually weakens your immune system to the point that it can no longer fight off infections and fungi and other things that people with healthy immune systems can fight off. So you will eventually die from HIV if you don't have any kind of medication. Well, that's the third thing. If those two things are, if the fact that it's incurable is a piece of bad news, a piece of good news is that it's treatable. And this is really important, again, because of treatment. People who have access to these life-saving medications called antiretroviral medications, it extends life. Without access to this medication, a person in the developing world has about a 3 to 5 year window to live once they're infected. Here in the United States, if someone's immune system is stronger, the virus can stay dormant in your body for up to 10 years. You're contagious that whole time. You may not know it, but you are contagious, but you don't have any symptoms until maybe at the 10-year mark or 8 or 9 years, suddenly you're getting some weird illnesses, weird diseases that shouldn't happen to somebody your age or somebody with your, quote, health, and suddenly you're diagnosed with AIDS. And these medications make a huge difference. I want to show you a picture, a slide of here. This is from Paul Farmer's clinic in Haiti. And the first one shows a man who is near death. He has tuberculosis. He is skeletal. He looks like Joanna, the woman in Mozambique. He is not far from death. It's why they call HIV in many places called the wasting disease, because people waste away to nothing. So here he is. You can see the bones sticking out all through his body. He is near death. He began to receive the antiretroviral medications, and 6 months later, isn't that crazy? That's the power of these medications. That's a reason to be an advocate for people with HIV because, listen, only about 8 to 11% of the people in the world who need this treatment have access to it. The reason you don't hear that much about HIV in the United States as we used to is because the people in the United States have access to the medication that takes you from being a dead person to somebody who's now living again and will have most likely a more normal lifespan. I want to be an advocate for people who don't have access to medication that can actually extend their lives. It's a very powerful reason to be an advocate for people with HIV. The fourth reason I am an advocate for people with HIV is because it's preventable. This is another piece of really important news. When I was diagnosed with breast cancer, I asked the doctor, how did I get cancer? You know, how did I get cancer? What did I do wrong? What should I have done differently? And he said, we just don't really know. We don't know. We have theories, we have ideas, there's a lot of research going on, but I can't tell you why you ended up with breast cancer. He said, but when it comes to HIV, the difference is we know. HIV, we know. Almost like 25 years ago, they discovered the virus, HIV. They discovered how it's transmitted. It's no secret. It's no mystery. It's not even rocket science. We know how HIV is transmitted. Because of that, it is largely a preventable disease. I don't know if you know that or not. It is largely, almost 100% preventable disease. And we have the responsibility to make sure we give the messages of prevention to people so that they can protect themselves from this disease that is incurable and has such incredible stigma to it. Just in case you, just making sure you know this, HIV is not spread through casual contact. It's not spread through casual light kissing, through hugging, through touching, from eating from the same utensil as somebody who's HIV positive, drinking from their glass. It is intimate sexual contact or breastfeeding or childbirth or through IV drug use, through needle sharing. That's how HIV is transmitted, not by being friends with or hanging out with somebody who is positive. The fifth reason, and this is the one that's a made-up word, but it says so much. The fifth reason I am an advocate, and I'm really begging you to consider becoming an advocate in some way for people with HIV, is because it is curable. If it's unpredictable, and it's incurable, and it's treatable, and it's preventable, well, here's the word I've made up. It's curable. There are just an infinite number of ways that we can demonstrate love to people who have received this diagnosis that's going to alter their lives. It's not just a chronic disease. I get so mad on every World AIDS Day. I'll hear radio shows of disc jockeys who think that if you just take a pill, that it's okay. That you can have HIV. What's the big deal? Why do we need a whole day to talk about AIDS? No. HIV is not like diabetes. HIV is not like heart disease. HIV is not like anything else that you can think of. It's not like a cold and you just take a course of antibiotics and you're fine. HIV is a terrible illness, and nobody should get it. We don't want anybody to become HIV positive. I'm glad the medication is there, but we want it not to be there at all. It needs care. It needs people who will care about it. And for me as a person of faith, when I first became an advocate, I needed to know, I wanted to come to my faith and to figure out what does my faith tradition have to say about this. And so for me, as a Christian, I went to the Bible. And in Mark chapter 1, verses 40 to 42 is one of my very favorite passages of Scripture. It's only 2 little verses, Mark 1, 40 to 42. But it talks there about how Jesus met a leper. And maybe some of you have heard HIV being compared to leprosy. And there's really some apt comparisons there, not in the way it's transmitted, but in the way that people react to it. In Jesus' day, and still today, I've been in leper colonies in the Philippines, and this is still as true today as it was 2,000 years ago when the Bible was written. But then and now, people who are lepers are ostracized. And in Jesus' time in particular, if you were a leper, you had to live outside the town. You couldn't even live near the town. And leprosy, it's Hansen's disease, it causes nerve damage, and so you might injure yourself, but because you've lost the feeling in a body part because of the damage that leprosy does to the body, you might injure yourself and end up with gangrene or an infected place on your body, and you don't even really know it. And so because of that, people end up having fingers amputated because they're, you know, how many times you bang your finger or your toes? We're always banging our toes or banging our fingers. And so people end up without fingers and without toes. Noses end up being cut off, ears. And so people are disfigured. So in Jesus' day, without that surgery, people would end up wrapping themselves in white cloths. And so lepers were wrapped in white cloths. They were made to live outside of town. And after a while, nobody would get near them. Nobody, because it was so contagious. And everybody assumed that if you were a leper, you had done something really bad, and that's why you were a leper. So in this particular story, in Mark chapter 1, verses 40 to 42, there is a man who is a leper, and he has heard about this guy named Jesus. And he's heard the stories that this guy heals people, he heals the blind, he causes the deaf to hear, he even takes bread and fish and multiplies it in such a way that thousands are fed, and he wants something for himself. He wants a miracle. He wants to be cured of leprosy. One thing I didn't tell you is if you left where you lived on the outside of town and then came into town, every step of the way you had to call out, unclean. You had to alert people that you were coming and that you were unclean. So here's this man, he's coming from the outskirts of towns, and he begins to walk, and he's going through the city trying to find this guy, Jesus, who has this reputation of healing people. And so he's going through town, and he's calling out everywhere he goes, unclean, unclean, and all of a sudden he spots him. And he walks up to him, and here's what it says in Mark 1, 40 to 42. It says that a man with leprosy came to him and begged him on his knees, if you are willing, you can make me clean. Filled with compassion, Jesus reached out his hand and he touched the man, and he said, I am willing. And he touched him, and immediately the leprosy left him, and he was cured. Now, to me, in my faith tradition, that gives me three very clear responses to people who are sick, particularly people who are sick with a stigmatizing illness. The first thing is it tells me Jesus responded with compassion, so my response needs to be that of compassion. Jesus didn't respond the way that everybody else did, which would have been with revulsion, with being repulsed. He didn't back away from the man. In fact, it says that he was filled with compassion for him. He cared for him. Now, for me, I have to be really honest that some of the reasons that I wasn't really interested in HIV was I had a very judgmental and hard heart. And at that point in time, 7 years ago, I thought that I thought everybody knew how HIV was transmitted, and if you put yourself at risk and you became HIV positive, oh well, don't come crying to me for sympathy. If you do the crime, you pay, do the crime, you pay the time. You do something stupid, you're going to pay a cost. My heart was very, very hard and very apathetic. And yet as I began to explore what my faith teaches me about how to respond to people who are sick, I realized I was way out of line. I had no excuses. I had no reason whatsoever to respond that way. I was wrong. Because in my faith tradition, the person who models for me how to behave showed complete compassion to someone who had a stigmatizing illness. For me, it's like this. Even if you don't get into the religious connotations about HIV or anything, maybe you just think, you know what? I don't have time to care for somebody who's sick. People know how it's spread, and if they mess around, and they get sick, well, okay, I don't have time for that. I've got other stuff I need to do. Well, for me, it's like this. If I were driving out here on the freeway, and let's just say it's night, and a car passes me going 100 miles an hour, it's speeding, and it doesn't have its lights on. I can look at that car as it goes by me going, whoa, that is an accident waiting to happen. Those people, they are going to get in an accident. Do they not understand what risk they are placing themselves under? 100 miles an hour down a freeway at night with no lights on? Come on, you're going to get hurt. And let's just say a few miles down the road, sure enough, I run into that car, and that car has had an accident. And all over the freeway are people, bodies are spilled all over the freeway. People are bleeding. Do you think that I'm going to walk up to that accident scene and stand over the people and point at them and say, you were stupid. You put yourself at risk. You did dumb things. Don't expect me to help you. No. None of us would do that. We're going to grab our cell phones. We're going to be calling 911 as fast as we can. We're going to be down on our knees trying to hold and cradle the people whose bodies are broken, who are wounded, and we're going to say things like, don't worry, I'm here. I'm not going to leave you. I'm not going to leave you alone. I'll be with you till the ambulance gets here. So why do we treat HIV differently? Why do we treat HIV with a stigma? What if you had a heart attack? You're too young to have heart attacks, but what if you had a heart attack and you're in the hospital and your friends come in and they look at you and they say, been eating too many Krispy Kreme, huh? You know, too many In-N-Out burgers. We don't do that. We don't do that. Why would we do that with HIV? So Jesus showed that he cared with compassion, and it didn't matter to him if the person had done anything, if the person had put themselves at risk, or it didn't matter. It was immaterial. What he wanted to know was, how can I help you? And then the second thing that I see from that is that he touched the man. Now, to me, this is super, super, super significant, because when people are sick, when people are feeling at their very worst, to be touched, to have somebody actually put their hands on you, to have somebody put their arms around you, makes you feel like you're human again. It makes you feel like you're worth something, even though you feel cruddy. I don't know if you can, I can think of so many times, I hate to throw up, and I can think of times when I was growing up and I'd get the flu and I would be puking my guts out over the toilet, and my mom or my dad would come in and they would just put their hand on my shoulder and they would just let me know that even though I've got sweat running down my face and, you know, I've got vomit on my clothes and I smell, I'm still valuable. And people with HIV long to know that they are valuable. And one of the most powerful ways you and I can show that is through touch. It is through acceptance. I have a friend of mine, Dave Storm, and I want you to see his story.
I don't know, my life isn't that much different than anybody else's, except that I take a lot of drugs. And wait for it to mix. And this is what, you use this big one here, and then you suck them up into these little ones, and that's what you inject into your body. This is testosterone, and I rub it on my body. This is nitro in case I have a heart attack. I can stick some under my tongue. It'll open the arteries. And then I do 2 injections a day for the AIDS. It's a new drug called Fusion. I'm on test drugs that I take, and then I take regular drugs, and then I take maintenance drugs. I take my blood pressure about 8 times a day. But then we had a big problem, is the fact that this disease had so much stigma with it. Who do we tell? What do we do now? How many people do you tell you have this? And then if you tell your barber, they're gonna still cut your hair? You know, and it's, they didn't have guidelines. They didn't have anything. And so we kept it a secret. We didn't, you know, we got shot down once, and we weren't about to share it with anybody else. We're part of a small group, and it had been there for a small group. I lied to everybody and told them I had cancer. I didn't, because everybody knew I was sick. So I had to say something, and so I was, besides hiding it, I was lying, you know? And the small group, they actually believed that God brought AIDS on earth to kill all the gays. And they would actually thank the Lord for this disease. We didn't belong to a small group until we started a Saddleback, because we're just so turned off and, you know, hurt. Kay and Rick asked me to speak at the pastors' conference that they had with 4,000 pastors. And so it was the first time I gave my testimony. I did a great job until I said one sentence, and the sentence was,
"This is the first time I shared with this many people."
Acceptance. Sometimes you make up these stories about yourself that really aren't true, and maybe I would have been accepted the whole time. But it was really the first time that I felt acceptance from like the world, you know, everybody, like it was okay. Maybe I'll make it through this, you know.
For 20 years, Dave didn't tell anybody that he was HIV positive. His own daughter didn't even know, because of the rejection they had experienced at a church early on. Not our church, another church. So for 20 years, he carried that secret. When I watch this and I see, I don't know if you noticed, but Dave made that statement. He said, you know, I said this is the first time I've told this many people. And if you look, the camera panned back, and there was one guy who like shot up off the front row in a standing ovation. It makes me cry every time, because that man has no idea what a gift he gave to Dave that day. He has no idea what his acceptance and affirmation of Dave as a man, as a person of worth and value. Dave will tell you that to this day, that is one of the sweetest moments of his life. And you and I can give that to people. It's within our grasp to give that kind of compassion and acceptance. And then the third thing that I see from that story is that Jesus actually healed the man, and I don't have the power to do that. That's never happened any time I've prayed for anybody, but it doesn't stop me from praying for people to be healed. But I'll tell you what I see from that is that you and I might think that a person's greatest need with HIV is to be free of HIV, to be cured, to be healed of that. Like my greatest need as somebody who had had cancer was to be cured of that. And I have to tell you, as important as that is, that's not our greatest need. I believe our greatest needs are spiritual. Our greatest needs are to know that we matter, that we count, that our lives have value and our lives have meaning. And so I want to show you another short video piece of a pastor in Rwanda. His name is Stratton. And in this video, he kind of encapsulates how I want to wrap up our time together by showing you what it is that is in the power of your hands to do. As just an average, ordinary person, what you can do, not only about AIDS, because you're going to see what Stratton is doing about HIV where he lives, but you're going to see it's transferable, and it's the very things that you can do here, right as you live here at USC. So watch this.
Sometimes I get overwhelmed walking through the market. How many of these people have hope? How many are lost? How many are suffering? How many have AIDS? I've read the statistics. Many people I see right now in this crowd have AIDS. But what are statistics? We all have lost a brother, a parent, cousin, or a friend. We are all affected. My name is Stratton Yata. It means I come with gifts. But sometimes I don't feel like I have much to bring. When Jesus met a blind man in the street, he was not concerned with how the man became blind. Jesus loved sick people even when everyone else ran away. AIDS. He has AIDS. I don't know why. Did the doctor give him a bad blood? Did he make a sinful choice? Or does it matter? Maybe it shouldn't matter. He is sick. Would I look at him differently if he had cancer? And his daughter, soon, she will be an orphan, and her life will be poverty. She has no choice in this matter. What am I to do? What am I to do? I am a pastor. I'm their pastor. They go to my church. They live in my community. I can't do much. I'm not a doctor. I do not have the cure. But here I am. I used to tell my congregation to help people who are sick. I thought that was my only job, to preach about compassion. But what if true compassion is to put your legs in someone else's shoes, to walk where they walk? I did not have this kind of compassion before. I started to talk about AIDS at church. I started visiting people in their home. I just show up, and I cannot do this alone. This is Deborah. Deborah is a volunteer from our church. God touched her heart. There are many from our church like Deborah. The body of Christ, the hands and feet of Jesus. This man lost his wife several years ago. She died of AIDS. Then he got sick too. Now, he's at home and cannot work. He's dying, but his children do not know it. What will happen to the children? The children, they are HIV positive. They don't know it yet. What do I say to them? But I can be here, touch them, pray. Then it happens. Their face will change. You see some joy in their eyes. It is good. The hope comes again. I did nothing tangible to help them. I was just there. The church began to show this kind of compassion. Those who are infected are afraid, so we held their hands. Those who are infected feel alone, so we visited them. Those who are infected are confused, so we counseled them. Those who are infected feel rejected, so we accepted them. We loved people who were hurting. A few years ago, I did nothing. People in my own community were dying. They were dying every day. They died alone. They died afraid. They died rejected by the church. A few years ago, I thought preaching was enough. That was my compassion. But if we don't do something, who will? If we don't show God's love, who will? If we don't show up, who will?
Stratton didn't have some elaborate plan. And it's great to have elaborate plans. The world's got a lot of broken places. The world's got a lot of messed up situations. But there's a place for just average people like me and you who just show up in this community, outside of your little confine here. Well, first of all, there are people here on this campus who are positive. Some of them don't know it. Some do, some don't. But on a campus this size, believe me, there are people who are HIV positive. And those who know it most likely have not shared it with very many people because of the stigma, because of being afraid of being rejected. There are those who are on this campus who are positive and don't know it. And so there are things that you and I can do. There are things that you can do right here with people on this campus and people right outside within the community, people who are positive. And I want to give you 6 things that I think everybody can do really quick. They don't require any money. They don't require some elaborate program. They're really mostly about showing up. The first is you can make a determination that you're going to be one of those people who cares about people who are positive. That's the starting place. For me, it's where I had to start. It's where Stratton started. It's this whole idea of I voluntarily choose to care for and support people who are sick, people who are HIV positive. It's what I call offering your presence. It's when that woman that I met in Mozambique who was on that piece of plastic on the ground, I didn't live there. There wasn't a whole lot. There was no medicine I could have given her that was going to give her life back. There was nothing that I could do that was going to change the situation. She was going to die. What I wish had happened is if someone else right there who had visited her with me had actually taken her into their home. That's what I wish had happened. I couldn't do it. I'm in the United States. But what I could do was be with her. I could be there. I could sit next to her. I could let my tears mingle with hers. I could visit her. I could give her words of encouragement. There are people surrounding us who need words of encouragement. And you and I just have to be willing to move outside of ourselves to do it. We're all so absorbed in ourselves. Let's just be honest. I love myself more than I love anybody. You know? I call it the kingdom of K. And in the kingdom of K, I reign. I am the queen in the kingdom of K. And I spend most of my days orchestrating life to suit me. My comfort level, what I want done, how I want something done, and you do too. So to care about people who are HIV positive, to care about the orphans in our world, you're going to have to move outside of yourself, outside of your own self-interest, the things that absorb you, your school, maybe your career plans, where you're working. I mean, you're going to have to choose to take on what I call somebody else's pain. Lewis Smedes has written, I think, the definitive work on suffering with other people. And this is what it's going to take. If you're going to care for other people, you must choose to put on your shoulders pain that is not your own. I will never know the millions of people in this world who are HIV positive. I'll never know them all. I'll never know all the orphans. I'll never know them. I'll never know them in their suffering. But I have chosen to, the best of my ability, take on my shoulders and into my heart their pain. Lewis Smedes says this about it. I love it. He says, you and I must choose to walk eyes wide open into the pain of another and make it our own. That's what it means to care for and support people who are sick. The second thing that everybody can do is to, what I call handle testing. Encourage people to get HIV testing. You can get HIV testing here on this campus. Everybody should know their status. And if you don't know your HIV status, you need to know it. You need to know it, and you need to encourage other people to know their status. When you're in the community, that's one of the simple things you can do to tell people is, have you been tested for HIV? Hey, you haven't? I'll go with you. Don't let it be a stigmatizing thing. Don't let it be something that people are afraid to try or to risk. Go with them. You can be a part of a volunteer base. This is a huge campus, and so many of you could find an hour or two every week to volunteer, to do something in one of the existing AIDS agencies that are around, to be a part of a mentoring program for kids who are positive, whose family members are positive. You could be a part of caring for vulnerable children. I mean, you could be a part, there's so much you could do in existing agencies or through a local faith community. This is a big one that every one of us can do, and that's remove the stigma. I want to make a statement that may sound really harsh. Don't mean it that way, but I think it's true. If you don't know anybody who's HIV positive, it's really likely that you're not a safe person. Because there are people all around you who are HIV positive. And if you don't know anybody who is HIV positive, and I don't mean the people that I know like in Africa, 10,000 miles away. I mean if you don't know somebody in your life who's positive, you are probably not a safe person. And so if you want to be a part of helping with this world's greatest humanitarian crisis, you need to make sure that you're a safe person, that you're not the person making the sly little jokes. You're not the person who's doing the little wink, wink, nod, nod. You're not the person who's making the jokes as you stand in the line to get your potato chips out of the vending machine. I mean, all the things that we do that let other people know, really not a safe person. You can remove the stigma by becoming a safe person. Champion healthy behavior. The prevention messages are simple. They're easy, they're effective, they work. You need to know what they are, and you need to make sure that you practice them yourself and that you encourage other people to practice them. I make no apologies for abstaining until marriage. I make no apologies for that. I think it's the ideal. It is the way you will not get HIV or any other STD. I believe in marriage being faithful, and people will say, well, that's just so unrealistic. It's hard. I didn't say it's easy. But why would I throw away the best just because it's hard? I also believe in condoms. I also believe that condoms used correctly and consistently every time will put a measure of protection against HIV. I believe in all of it. I think it's a mistake to just say only condoms or just abstinence or just faithfulness. It's got to come together. And the messages of prevention are simple and they're easy to talk about. And then to just do something as simple, if you know somebody who's HIV positive, encourage them to take their medication. They don't take their medication regularly. I don't know if you know this. I told you that HIV mutates so quickly that if you miss even a single dose of your medication, the virus has an opportunity to mutate, making the medication that you're taking very soon no longer effective, and you have to move to a harder to take, more toxic drug. So just helping people to remember to take their medication is something you can do. So these are things that I believe you can do. Every one of you can make a decision that I'm going to care. My heart maybe has been hard, or I've been apathetic, or I've just thought, oh, that's someplace else. It doesn't really touch my life. But you can make a decision to become somebody who will care for and support people who are sick. You can encourage others to get tested for HIV, and you get tested yourself. You can volunteer. You can remove the stigma by becoming a safe person who is somebody that other people can trust with this very, very private, life-altering information. You can promote the messages of prevention, and you can, if you know somebody who's positive, be a real support to them in helping them take their meds. None of that costs money. None of that requires a huge plan. None of that requires a special expertise, particular medical knowledge. It's just a person with a caring and compassionate heart who has said, I will walk eyes open into the pain of other people and take it as my own. I'd like to thank you for this time together, and I think we've got time for questions and answers. I'm totally available for that. Comments or questions or anything on your mind. I think we've got some time to do that. Yeah, in the back.
I'm Lauren.
Hey, Lauren. Thanks. I'm most interested in, we talk about, I have lots of things to share with you. I'll just try real briefly. We talk about slow and stop as ways to prevent HIV, because there are certain things that will actually slow the spread of the pandemic, and then there are other things that we think that can stop it. And slowing the pandemic is to support correct and consistent condom use every time. L is to limit the number of sexual partners. All kinds of studies have shown that the fewer sexual partners, the less chance you have of becoming HIV positive. To offer needle exchange where appropriate. To wait for sexual debut. The older someone is before they have their first sexual experience, also the less likely they are to become HIV positive. Doesn't mean it doesn't happen, but it just lowers it. So that's a proven ways to slow down the spread of HIV. We also talk about a stop strategy, which is a little more radical and a little more difficult to achieve, but believe it's possible. And one is to save sex for marriage. T is to train men and boys to treat women with respect and dignity. One of the ways that HIV is transmitted many times is sexual violence, and women around the world having very little power in their relationships to ask a partner to use a condom or to even talk about sex. And if they do, many times violence ensues. And so to teach men and boys to respect women and girls, and then to partner with one person for life, marriage. I mean, those all go together. They all work, and we've tried to be comprehensive and not just one or the other. But yeah, the question, if you didn't hear her, is she said, do you know statistics that show like how many people were infected through a certain way? They were either through their own behavior, through rape, through childbirth, through blood transfusion, whatever. And I'm sure somewhere at the UN level they've got some of those stats, but it's very hard to ascertain that because the fact is so many people, at least a fourth of people in the United States, don't even know they're positive. So it's really hard to get really good numbers on the question you're asking. But we do know that one of the myths in the United States, at least one of the myths that I grew up thinking, was that HIV was a gay disease, and it is not. 51% of the people in the world who are infected with HIV are women. Around the world, it is more commonly a heterosexual, spread through heterosexual contact. So that's a myth, even though that is about 60% of the people in the United States are either gay or bisexual, but worldwide that statistic is not repeated. The point is, and for me, the bottom line is it doesn't matter. You know, that's kind of where you get to. It doesn't matter how, if somebody was careless or somebody was raped, or, I mean, of course we care about people's pain, but at the end of the day, it doesn't change how we respond. How somebody became infected is not the operative question. The operative question is, how can I help you? If people want to tell you their story after you get to know them in a relationship, you may come to find those pieces of information, but they're certainly not relevant as we began in ministering, caring for people who are positive. I saw other hands a minute ago. Sorry, yes. We have an HIV support group for people who are infected and for their family members. We have formed care teams, which is people who have been taken 6 hours of training, and they make a commitment to somebody who is positive to just come alongside in a relationship for a minimum of 6 months. So it might be 3 people in a care team who provide rides to the doctor, you know, simple household chores, clean their house. Hey, I've got tickets to the Angels game. You want to come with me and my family? It's about relationship, those care teams. It's not about giving money per se. It's relationship. We hold training events. We've done 3 global summits on AIDS in the church that have attracted, you know, 3,000 people at a time. The top AIDS researchers, doctors, physicians, social workers, from the UN to presidential candidates. I mean, it's a very big deal trying to spread the message through the faith community that HIV is something that all the faith communities need to address, and then provide education and information to them. So, you know, from support groups to care teams to informational events to, we do World AIDS Day events. We have a global outreach in Rwanda in particular. We have a pilot project in Rwanda where we're trying to address healthcare inequities by training and equipping community healthcare workers through the churches, at the same time strengthening the local hospitals so that there is this tremendous linkage and that people get primary healthcare in ways that they never would have gotten. So it's both local and global, some of the things that we've done. Well, the last 7 years I've done a ton of traveling. My own family situation, my daughter has been pretty ill the last few months, and so I've had to curtail some of the speaking that I do. You know, I kind of look at life as a big adventure. You know Polaroid cameras? You remember Polaroid cameras? How you take the picture and then out comes this little gray piece of photographic paper. That's the way I kind of feel life is. You know, you get handed this little piece of gray photographic paper, and you look at it and you go, "What is that? Who is that? Is that Aunt Martha? I don't know what I'm looking at." And the longer you look at it, the longer you live with it, you start going, that's what I'm supposed to do. My life is so unpredictable. I don't know. It is an adventure where I wait to see what's next. I never thought I'd be an HIV advocate to begin with, let alone, what's next. I don't know. I really am passionate about orphans and believe that we have an enormous responsibility to those 138 million kids, and so increasing some advocacy for the orphans in the world. Did you know, sorry, I have to answer this one in this way, that in the United States there are 500,000 kids in the foster care system, and of those 118,000 are adoptable. If just one family out of every 4 churches adopted a child, there would be no orphans in the United States. I mean, can you believe that? We could wipe out orphans as a problem in the United States with just 1 out of every 4 families in a church if they adopted a child. It's pretty amazing. It's doable. So that's one of the things that I look ahead with HIV advocacy. I've been really concerned about PEPFAR, the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief. Under President Bush, it was the largest health care initiative ever proposed by the United States government for any particular cause, and it's going to be flatlined. The budget was approved, a higher budget was approved last year, but then when it comes to appropriations, it's probably going to be flatlined, which means all the money that's been promised isn't probably going to be given. And so that's an issue that matters to me, and advocating on behalf of keeping the promises on the money. What else? Well, we really try to make it, we've been tested. My husband's taken public HIV tests, and it got some national attention because we wanted to do what we could to take down the stigma. In fact, that's one of the things that caught my attention about President Obama before he was president, when we invited him to our last Global AIDS Summit, is because I saw on CNN him taking a public HIV test in Kenya, and I thought, how cool is that? For when was the last time a U.S. politician of any stature publicly took an HIV test? And that really attracted me to his courage to be able to do that. So I think wherever we go, we encourage the pastors to be the first ones, or the church leaders, whoever the leaders are in a faith community. We encourage them to be the first ones to be tested publicly so that they can set the example for the rest of their community to say, look, you can do it, it's no big deal. If you become positive, we're not going to push you away. You're going to be enfolded into the faith community. This is the place you want to go, not run from. So we really think that faith leaders should be the ones to lead the way. And then when they do, then it makes it easier for other people to get tested and not be afraid. Were you just brushing your hair? The more rural the area, you can pretty much assume it's going to be less knowledge, about HIV. A lot of the school systems, particularly in Africa, because it is such a huge problem in Africa, have HIV training in the schools, HIV information and training. But the further you get away from a city, there's going to be less and less people who know. But that's, again, where the faith community, not just churches, but all faith communities, because they're present. The faith community is present in every little nook and cranny of the world. And so if faith communities, regardless of what religion they are, if they'll take the responsibility, they already exist right there. They're trusted people in the community to pass on the information. It's one of the underutilized ways to get information out through that existing networks. Yeah?
What are the other big organizations that are working on AIDS today, just throughout the world?
Oh, gosh. The Global Fund, the UNAIDS, PEPFAR through the U.S. government. There's a lot of NGOs, non-government organizations, World Vision, Compassion, the Global Business Fund against the fight against AIDS. In Africa, there's one called OFLA, the Organization of African First Ladies Against AIDS. There's got about 41 or so of the First Ladies involved. And then there's a zillion mom and pop organizations, literally a zillion. I mean, I can't even count all the different ones. They're innumerable. But the biggest ones are probably UNAIDS, Global Fund, PEPFAR. Did I leave out anything? Anybody else know? Did I leave out one? I think those are the biggest ones.
How much of the money for PEPFAR showed they're flatlining?
Sorry, from the previous budget years. Yes, so it's the coming budget year. After they approve it, then it has to be actually appropriated. It's like Congress said, okay, we passed this law, but then they have to go back and actually release the money, and they haven't released the money. So they're still going on, but they're just not releasing it at the levels that were promised last year. So it hasn't stopped. It would be tragic if that money were to stop. Millions of people would die. They would die. So they can't stop it, but hopefully they'll keep increasing it.
Question, please.
Yeah, sorry. She said I had said 8 to 11. It's closer to 11% of people actually have access to these antiretroviral drugs. She said how many of those people are in third world countries? And I said most of them, because the greatest preponderance of HIV is in southern Africa. So, Russia, China, India, the Caribbean. The United States has over 1 million people, as we said, who are infected, but out of 33 million people infected worldwide, the vast majority are in poor, low-income countries. Thanks, you guys. I'll stand around, be glad to talk to you, but I appreciate your attention.